Hey everybody, I recently had the opportunity to attend the Endwalker media tour, and I finally get to share my thoughts with you. But before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of the first responders and medical personnel around the world that have been working so hard to fight COVID-19. Without your efforts, we would not be in the place that we are today, and we would not be in a position to continue fighting against this pandemic. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I think I speak for everybody when I say that your bravery, your courage, and your determination is extremely appreciated. You're our heroes, and I'll always be proud of you. Thank you very much for all of your hard work and your service. And without further ado, let's get into Gunbreaker. Now I want to make a special note that the preview build we got to play on is still in development, and anything you see is subject to significant changes and may not even appear in the final version of the game. And while I will be discussing potencies, I do not want that to be a focus at all. Anything that you learn from this video is going to assist you with rotation, and barring a few niche situations, potency changes in the final version of the game should not change how we think about approaching Gunbreaker as we head into the Endwalker expansion and double down on our favorite job. The very first thing we're going to take a look at is our combo. If you pay attention closely here, you're going to notice that we do not drop our combo for 30 seconds. Whether this was an intended decision or not is yet to be determined, but if this is the case, then whoo, does this change the way we're going to think about things. Suddenly, certain rotations that we didn't think were possible become reality. And how cool is that? This is particularly useful for Gunbreaker when we have our Bloodfest No Mercy window with our new rotation. While it does make me wonder what kind of disengagement mechanics we're going to see in the future, it does give me a sense of ease. I believe we're going to see far fewer players dropping a combo now, and while they may be clipping and not pressing things when they're readily available, we're going to see less punishment as players are learning, and I think that's a great thing. Let's talk about the new stuff. First up, we have Double Down, our new 2 ammo cartridge spender. This is a massive AoE on a 1-minute cooldown that hits for 1200 potency to the first enemy and 80% for all remaining enemies. Keep in mind that these potencies are subject to significant change. However, this should not change how we use it in our rotation. Next up is our newest continuation OGCD, Hyper Velocity. Continuation is an OGCD button after a certain GCD. In this case, Hyper Velocity is comboed off of Burst Strike. Now remember, if you don't use your continuation before your next GCD, you actually lose the proc. So you'll always be using this after you proc it, which means you may have to plan ahead, as you'll have one less OGCD slot at this time. Speaking of OGCDs, let's talk about Heart of Corundum. This thing is a full course meal of mitigation. It does everything you want and more. Okay, well, not everything. Let's break it down. HOC is your upgraded Heart of Stone that you acquire at level 82. This provides 15% mitigation for 8 seconds, as it always has, while also granting the Brutal Shell buff if you use it on a party member while you have the buff up. In addition to that, we got a few other goodies, like Clarity of Corundum. Clarity of Corundum adds an additional 15% mitigation for the first 4 seconds of the buff being up, which is huge by the way. But we're not done yet. That's right, we also get Catharsis of Corundum. This works like a Scholar's Excog, where it heals you if you fall below 50% of your HP, or when the buff falls off. Now, the tooltip states that it lasts for 10 seconds, but while I used it in the media tour, it lasted for 30 seconds on my buff bar. This leads me to believe that it could be either of those options, and it's possible that the duration is something else entirely upon official release. We'll just have to wait and see. Next, let's go over what's gone up, what's gone down, and what's stayed the same. Keen Edge is the first part of our filler combo, and while most attacks have gone down in potency in line with melee changes, Keen Edge is the only one to have gone up. Brutal Shell received a 10% decrease in damage, while the heal and shield remained the same. The finisher for our filler combo, Solid Barrel, received an 18% decrease in damage, and still generates a cartridge. Once again, keep in mind that all of these potencies are subject to change. Our ammo spender, Burst Strike, received a 20% decrease in damage, but now grants Ready to Blast. Ready to Blast allows you to use Hyper Velocity, which is your 200 potency continuation that we talked about earlier. So while Burst Strike received a 20% decrease in damage, if you add Hyper Velocity to it, it actually received a 20% buff. We'll discuss my thoughts on Burst Strike and the addition of continuation a little bit later. Gnashing Fang and its continuation combo Jugular Rip have been reduced by 20% and 31% respectively, for a total of 540 potency. Since Burst Strike and Hyper Velocity are a total of 600 potency, while you still prioritize Gnashing Fang over Burst Strike if you only have one cartridge, if you have to prioritize one in raid buffs, you would choose Burst Strike with Hyper Velocity, although ideally you get everything in buffs. Savage Claw and Abdomen Tear have received a 20% and 21% damage reduction respectively. But you know what? The biggest change to Savage Claw is that it now shares a keybind with Gnashing Fang, reducing hotbar bloat and operating much like PvP combos function. Just like Savage Claw, Wicked Talon is also on the Gnashing Fang keybind. Wicked Talon and Eye Gouge have received a 20% and 13% damage reduction, meaning the start of our Gnashing combo has received a larger reduction in potency, while the end of our combo has received a less staggering reduction. And that wraps up all of our weapon skills that are tied to continuation. Sonic Break had its potency reduced by 25%. Its initial damage is still 300 potency, while its damage over time has been reduced from 90 potency to 60 potency per tick for 30 seconds. This makes Sonic Break the second best GCD that you can use, leaving Double Down as your strongest. You know what? Lightning Shot stayed the same, except of course for the fact that it no longer breaks combo, which is pretty sweet. And since in the Mediator build it did look like our combo doesn't break for 30 seconds, it makes you wonder if we're going to get a lot of mechanics in Endwalker through the various encounters that cause us to have to disengage frequently, or for extended periods of time. Wouldn't that be something? Well friends, it looks like our AoE combo has been sliced and slaughtered, receiving a larger potency cut than the other abilities we have in our kit. Demon Slice has received a 33% reduction in damage from 150 potency down to 100. Demon Slaughter has received a 36% decrease in damage, coming from 250 potency to 160 potency. We'll likely still be using the Demon Slaughter combo to generate cartridges in 2 targets or more, since the GCD to cartridge ratio is too good to pass up. Fated Circle received a 9% nerf, and while this may not seem like much, if potencies do not change, then we'll now use Burst Strike and Hyper Velocity instead of Fated Circle against 2 enemies. Fated Circle would either need to be bumped up to 300 potency to equal Burst Strike and Hyper Velocity, or be stronger than that to beat Burst Strike and Hyper Velocity. Bow Shock has also had its damage reduced by 31%. The initial potency went from 200 on application to 150, while its damage over time went from 90 potency per tick for 15 seconds to 60 potency per tick for 15 seconds, for a grand total of 650 potency in Shadowbringers to 450 potency in the Endwalker Mediator build. Blasting Zone has had a damage reduction of 25%, leaving it at 600 potency in the Endwalker Mediator build compared to the 800 potency on the live servers in Shadowbringers. This is still a great OGCD, and you should be using it on cooldown. Every other use will be inside of your No Mercy, as expected. Rough Divide. This is our gap closer. The damage of Rough Divide was reduced by 25%, but the range was increased to 20 yalms, leaving it on par with all of the other gap closers now. The warrior gets a 3rd charge. Bloodfest got a 3rd charge. Now we can hold even more ammos to rip and tear. You'll still be using Bloodfest on cooldown, which means that every other use will be inside of No Mercy, though it may take a little while to get used to having 3 cartridges. I know I fumbled a little bit, thinking, oh no, I'm going to overcap when I was sitting at 2 at the Mediator build, but we'll get used to it. No Mercy has been unaffected. It is still a 1-minute steroid that increases your damage by 20% for 20 seconds. After we conclude going over the skills, you'll get to see the rotation in action, and you'll get to see how cool the 3-minute Bloodfest No Mercy window is. Royal Guard is our tank stance. Turn it on when you want to tank, and turn it off when you don't. Camouflage is also unaffected. It's still a 10% reduction for 20 seconds, while increasing your parry rate by 50% through the duration on a 1.5 minute cooldown. Nebula is our big damage reduction, 15 seconds of 30% mitigation on a 2-minute recast. Although, the new Heart of Corundum, which offers about 28% mitigation plus a shield if you have Brutal Shell, is a big contender. And when you use them together, Heart of Light has been completely unaffected, and still grants 10% magic mitigation to the party for 15 seconds on a 1.5 minute cooldown. Aurora still grants a regen to the target of your choosing, and it heals for the same amount that it healed for in Shadowbringers. However, now you have 2 charges. This is super cool. You can give yourself a regen and your co-tank if you have to share tank busters, or simply give it to 2 targets. Maybe somebody's out of range. Maybe 2 people are out of range. Maybe your healers are recovering and you're trying to get people healthy for an incoming raid wide. Well, now you have more options. And I think that's super cool, to give tanks an additional way to recover a pull. So this is something cool. All of the tank invulns now last for 10 seconds, while their recast timers stayed the same. Now I am curious, since all of the tank invulns will be 10 seconds, it kind of makes you wonder what we could expect going into the next raid tier. Will we see multi-hit tank busters that are forced to use the full duration? If you remember in Eden's Gate, Warrior was the only tank that could not mitigate through all of Titan's tank busters at first, and they actually buffed the duration on home gang. But now, since everything is going to be 10 seconds, it kind of makes you wonder. And with that, that's every action taken care of. I had the opportunity to sit down with Lamatod and hit a training dummy for a few minutes, while getting to see how things lined up with Trick Attack with our new kit. Let's take a look at the tentative Gunbreaker rotation for Endwalker. So you'll see I began with the Lightning Shot opener, into Keen Edge, Brutal Shell, Solid Barrel. You would potion at this time as you go into Keen Edge, No Mercy. Here, we open up our Gnashing Fang as you would expect, Bloodfest, put up our dot with our OGCDs, into our new Double Down, get a Rough Divide on cooldown, as we finish our Gnashing Fang combo, and then get a Burst Strike combo as well, without fear of breaking our combo, due to the new rules of it not breaking for 30 seconds. From there, we iron everything out. Now keep in mind, while I'm doing this rotation, we were on a Media Tour test build with gear that was allocated to us, and as such, my skill speed was not optimal for what I would want to do with Gunbreaker. We were playing at a 2.46 GCD, and I really would have enjoyed to play at 2.41 or 2.4. Now this is where I really had to think, because in my mind, I was overcapping, and I had to have the mental fortitude to think, oh yeah, hey, don't overcap. As we head right back into our No Mercy, with 3 cartridges, we get our Gnashing, our Double Down, puts us back at 0. Sonic Break goes out, Blasting Zone, Bow Shock, our Rough Divides, everything you need. And if your skill speed's appropriate, you will hit this Burst Strike, and probably your Hyper Velocity as well. However, due to my slow skill speed, that was not possible. You're going to have a Gnashing Fang come up with your Bloodfest. That's perfectly fine. You're going to use this Bloodfest, do not hold it for the next No Mercy. As you go through 3 cartridges, you can expend them as you see fit. And we just start building up and staying close to cap as we prepare for our next No Mercy. I will say, getting to play Gunbreaker at level 90 felt like riding a bike. If you are very intimate with the level 80 rotation, I feel this will be an easy transition. It's very intuitive, and it feels more like a quality of life change than anything else. They gave us an extra cartridge, but also something to use it on. Double Down is an amazing button to add into our kit, as they did nerf Sonic Break a little bit, and the rest of our kit saw decreases across the board. But Double Down is that big hitter that you're really going to want in every single No Mercy window. So if you know that it's not in your No Mercy, you've probably done something critically incorrect, or a downtime phase has crippled your ability to keep your rotation flowing. Now this is our sweet window coming up. If you look in about 20 seconds, we're going to have our Bloodfest No Mercy window, and this is where we're going to have a lot of fun. So here, we're getting ready. We're building up on our 3rd cartridge, and if you look, it's perfectly timed. Now if we had a 2.41 GCD, we would get that Brutal Shell first, but that doesn't matter, because we hit a Gnashing. We hit a Burst Strike. We hit a Burst Strike and a Bloodfest. We hit a Double Down. We hit a Sonic Break. We hit a Savage Claw. We hit a Wicked Talon. And then we did a Brutal Shell, but we should not have. Do you know why? Because what we should have done there was a Burst Strike. Every single GCD in that window can be a Burst Strike. In my mind, I believe I was attempting to adhere to only using X amount of GCDs before breaking combo, forgetting that I could just do the Burst Strike. Later on, I do have a rotation where I show the Bloodfest No Mercy window. In fact, why don't we take a look at that now? I think we've seen what we need to as far as this rotation goes. It's pretty much going to loop, and the only mistake I would say that I made critically wrong there was that I used Burst Strikes into Bloodfest instead of just using Double Down Bloodfest. And both can be fine, but you risk pushing things out of buffs or weakening emboldened buffs so that your Double Down comes down when you have less emboldened stacks than what you would ideally like to have. So be sure you watch out for that as you're getting used to it. I'm sure we're all going to go through these growing pains. Just work with it and it'll be fine. Let's walk you through the Bloodfest No Mercy window. We're going to begin with Keen Edge, Brutal Shell, into No Mercy. Here, we enter Gnashing Fang, Blasting Zone, Jugular Rift, Double Down, Bloodfest, Bow Shock, Sonic Break, Rough Divide, Savage Claw, Abdomen Tear. Things start getting a little bit more simple now that we finished our Gnashing combo. So we go Burst Strike, Hyper Velocity, Burst Strike, Hyper Velocity, Burst Strike, and again Hyper Velocity, and then we smash that Solid Barrel right at the end. And that's going to be your 3-minute window. Let's head on over to the Charlian Scholasticate Endwalker Elementary, and we'll break down the rotation and what you need to know. If you count the GCDs you should be using there, you're going to have Gnashing, Double Down, and Sonic are 3. Savage Claw and Wicked Talon brings you to 5. Bloodfest is going to give you a Burst Strike, Burst Strike, Burst Strike. Now you're sitting comfortably at 8, and finish it off with a Solid Barrel. It's going to feel like a lot of weaving, and that's because it is. Just do your best to get used to it, and eventually it will become muscle memory. Now I know a lot of you want to start doing theory crafting and spreadsheeting, and you can, by all means, go for it. I would just like to remind you once again that everything is tentative at the moment and in development, and totally subject to massive changes. It's very possible that the rotation I went through just now isn't even viable upon release. However, just in case, I do have a couple of backups. But just forget about that, try your best, and have fun! Alright, let's get into the discussion session. A huge question I was asked repeatedly ever since we found out that Endwalker was going to be a thing was, Rin, what changes do you expect for Gunbreaker? What would you like to see? What do you think Gunbreaker needs? And honestly, I only wanted 2 things. When Gunbreaker was first released at the beginning of Shadowbringers, I felt it was as close to perfect as it could be. And the only improvements I could have thought of making was to give them a 2-cartridge spender, an additional ammo, or a defensive. So overall, I'm pretty satisfied. Now, if you were to ask if there's anything I saw that I wasn't expecting, I would say I didn't really expect to get a continuation off of Burst Strike, and I'm going to talk about why. Now, a lot of players find themselves in a delicate situation where they need to move the boss, but they're also in their Gnashing Fang window. Now, their options are, do I delay my window, or do I ask the other tank to take the boss? Should I not be main tanking right now? This is very difficult. I don't know how I can do this without clipping my GCD. Up until now, the answers have been to either utilize Sprint so you can slingshot your character and move the boss a little further than you'd anticipate so that you could get your Gnashing Fang continuation going while you're moving. An easier option was to save an extra cartridge and use Burst Strike during your Gnashing Fang window to move the boss because it does not interrupt your gnashing sequence. That's no longer a thing. Now that we have continuation attached to any of our single ammo, single target cartridge spenders, we're kind of out of options in that department. We may have to find ourselves utilizing Sonic Break and Double Down in our burst windows to move the boss. This is all assuming that we receive fights in Endwalker in which boss positioning is going to matter. I know in the last tier, we saw a lot of the boss self-centering themselves and moving themselves, and tanks didn't really have a lot of responsibility in that department. I'd like to see that change. It was a part of the complexity of tanking where a lot of players had responsibilities as DPS or as healers, and tanks kind of didn't have to handle a lot of things. If I could just name a few examples off the top of my head, I would say tanks don't have a large responsibility in basic relativity of E12. You could go even further back and to say that they don't have too much responsibility when it comes to Icelit Dragon Song in E8. You could also say, in terms of ultimates, they didn't really have a whole lot of adjustment that they needed to do during Inception on T or Suppression in Uwu. In fact, I would say they had the easiest role in that situation. They're always going to survive due to their tank privilege, and they don't have a whole lot of options that they have to do for execution. So being able to position the boss and properly plan mitigation are things that make tanking fun and engaging. And one thing that I will say, after looking over all of the tanks, is that it looks like we're going to have a lot of party mitigation and healing that we're going to have to put out on the party. I could not foresee Square Enix giving us this much power in our kit defensively and not giving us situations in which we have to use it. I do feel this will be a huge quality of life change for players playing in dungeons and maybe up to the extent of extreme trials, where you could kind of freelance your rotation and your cooldowns and get through it. However, I do also feel these are going to be powerful tools for progression. And since I do early progression, that is what my mind is instantly drawn to. Now let's take Dark Knight for an example. Dark Knight has Oblation. That is their new defensive that reduces the damage taken for a party member or yourself by 10%. They get 2 stacks of this and can place it on multiple players. This means that if you have a Dark Knight in your party, they could, theoretically, cover Oblation on 2 of your DPS and the Blackest Night on another DPS for a grand total of 3 squishy players getting party mitigation. Now, if you couple that with the Gunbreaker's Heart of Corundum, that's huge mitigation for every single DPS covered now. And if a DPS has self-mitigation, you can throw that on a healer. Gunbreaker also gets a double Aurora. Now, they have 2 regens, which I touched on earlier, and it allows you to help recovery moments. Now, in an ideal scenario, you may find yourself not needing to use Auroras because the party may not be taking a whole lot of damage. However, I have an inkling that we may be taking a lot more damage than we're used to going into this expansion with the sheer amount of power I see in our healing and defensive kits. I would not be surprised if there were an abundance of opportunities to utilize our kit in an efficient way to help our healers. Because at the end of the day, our defensive kit is not there for us, it is there for the healers. It is our job to do our best to make their job easier. And it is my goal to be a tank that helps assist the team to reach their maximum potential, and I hope that I can help you get there too. Speaking of maximum potential, the personals on Paladin and on Warrior are amazing. We have just about everything that you could throw into a defensive kit. Paladin gets double mitigation with a regen, and Warriors now no longer care about the gauge they have when they give somebody a nascent flash. It is a strict flat potency heal across the duration, in addition to mitigation, in addition to a shield. They got it all. Shake It Off now applies a heal when the effect expires. Divine Veil now heals upon expiration as well. And Paladins have healing in their kit via Sheltron and Holy Spirit now that does not need to break their combo. I feel the era of Paladin being an off-tank strictly is over, and I would not be surprised if Paladin becomes the premier tank to hold aggro on the boss. Now granted, I didn't get to do a whole lot of endgame testing, as the only opportunities we really had available were the A ranks in the open world, as well as a level 81 dungeon. Now I had the opportunity to run the dungeon with some lovely people who were all proficient in their job, and we struggled a little bit. I was very impressed with the engagement that they offered in the dungeon, as it was the very first dungeon we're going to be unlocking in Endwalker. And if that is a sign of things to come, then I believe we are going to have an extremely fun and engaging experience as we head into the holiday season. So where does this leave me going into Endwalker? Well, I'm going to level up all 4 tanks 100% for sure. However, do I feel that one tank is going to be the progression tank over the others? Yeah, I kind of feel like this time around, you're going to see a lot of teams lock Paladin because of its expansive kit that it's receiving. Do I think any tank is going to hinder Prog? No. Not at all. I personally believe that all 4 are going to be extremely fun, and they are all kitted in a way that allow them to help the team facilitate completion, and it will literally come down to whatever you enjoy playing the most. And that is always the #1 thing. The Final Fantasy XIV dev team has done a spectacular job at having every job feel comfortable and welcomed in a raid environment, and with what I got to play at the Endwalker Media Tour, that could not ring more true than it does right now. And I'm personally excited to get to play some of the other jobs on my alts. For one, I know I'm going to be playing Reaper. That job was super fun, but that's another video for another time. I hope you've enjoyed my discussion on Gunbreaker, and if you have any questions at all, please leave a comment below and I'd be happy to get to them. And don't forget to check out the other videos, as I did get to cover a number of jobs at the media tour. I wanted to start with my baby because Gunbreaker has been my love since we found out it was coming out. I want to once again express my gratitude to Square Enix for the opportunity to get to be a part of such a wonderful event. Thank you, and I'll catch you next time.